Forget about your silly whim, it doesn't fit the plan, on the 18th episode of Good Intentions. Mach Rider, the second of Nintendo's Schrodinger's black box games, has always struck me as something of an oddity. Of the roughly 24 black box releases Nintendo pumped out over the first few years of the NES's life, Mach Rider feels the least, well, Nintendo. A fairly serious combat racing game, Mach Rider lacks the company's usual whimsy. There are no cartoonish sprites here, no wacky creatures to avoid. Instead, the focus rests entirely on a grim futuristic setting, a post-apocalyptic hell dotted by the ruins of skyscrapers and dominated by angry bikers. The game's violent mechanics are completely unvarnished by the metaphorical silliness of its companion releases. Where other black box titles may have involved crushing enemies into paste or crisping them with fireballs, the inherent brutality of those other games was mitigated by goofy animations, or the fact that your deadly foes consisted of bushy-browed mushrooms and slack-jawed terrapins. Not so in Mach Rider, your high-speed bike warrior fires a machine gun and blows enemy riders into vapor. Mach Rider does constitute a first-party Nintendo creation, overseen directly by none other than Gunpei Yokoi. In many senses, it's the direct antecedent to Nintendo's other uncharacteristically hard sci-fi creation, Metroid. Many of the sound effects that appear throughout Mach Rider bear a strong resemblance to Metroid's effects, and your biker even explodes into fragments upon defeat, the same way Samus does. Oh, and on top of that, in the Arcade vs. Mach Rider rendition of the game, it appears that your reward for progress is seeing your roided-up space biker dude slowly unveiled as a blonde woman in a revealing sci-fi swimsuit, just like Metroid's revelatory reward system, which stripped Samus down to a bikini as acknowledgement of your efficient play. Fits into Nintendo continuity in the other direction, too. The game had precedent in the company's pre-video era. Mach Rider, or Mach Rider in Japanese, had previously been the name of a toy vehicle licensed for Japan from Hasbro, a race car that kids could send tearing across the floor with the aid of a mechanical launcher. Aside from the name, the game and toy have no real connection. The video game involves combat driving on a futuristic motorcycle, while the toy was simply a self-propelled F1 racer. But then again, maybe you could trace a connection between the two through the F1 race element. Satoru Iwata never had the chance to tackle Mach Rider in an Iwata Asks interview before his death, so we'll probably never know the full circumstances of the game's conception. But Mach Rider feels for all the world like a retooling of an existing Famicom title to better appeal to the US audience. And assuming Mach Rider actually was designed for Americans, that would certainly help account for the decidedly un-Nintendo vibe it gives off. Let's consider the facts. Mach Rider was a first-party Nintendo creation in the sense that Gunpei Yokoi oversaw its development as producer, but in truth the bulk of development work was handled off-site by HAL Laboratories. We've seen HAL a few times already on Good Intentions, beginning with Pinball back in 1984. HAL helped out with several early Famicom titles, including the most technically impressive release from 1984, the Japan-exclusive F1 Race. With F1 Race, HAL managed to transplant the behind-the-car racing perspective pioneered by Namco's pole position onto Famicom, which was no mean feat. Despite offering an incredible showcase of what the console could handle in its early days, F1 Race conspicuously didn't make an appearance in the US, most likely because Americans don't care about Formula One racing in the least. Still, it surely would have been a shame to let HAL's remarkable technical feat languish in Japan, right? Enter Mach Rider, possibly. I can't actually prove that Mach Rider came into existence as a means by which to retool F1 Race's engine to something that would offer a better fit with the prospective audience for the American NES, but that reading certainly would make sense. Americans may not care much about Formula One, but we love sci-fi and post-apocalyptic road combat and cool motorcycles. Back in 1985, pop culture detritus of the 70s still bobbed about in the mainstream US media, including Motorcycle Daredevil Evel Knievel, Captain America's patriotic racing bike, The Road Warrior, and Knight Rider. Add those things together, along with the arcade game's Farrah Fawcett striptease, and you have the makings of an incredibly zeitgeisty chunk of 80s pop culture perfectly aimed at the American market. This is even further reinforced by Nintendo's official release dates, which peg Mach Rider as the first NES title to have been released in America, October 1985, before Japan, a month later in November 1985. Mach Rider wouldn't have been the first NES release created for the sake of the overseas market, but it suggests a fundamentally different philosophical approach than its predecessors. Stack Up and Gyromite came into existence in order to justify the ROB peripheral, but those were meant to appeal to American retailers. Mach Rider seems aimed instead at American consumers. So it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that Mach Rider's purpose was to give HAL an opportunity to rework their F1 race tech into something a bit more appealing to the US market. And we do know that HAL did the bulk of work on Mach Rider. Not only do HAL employee initials and aliases appear in the high score table of Versus Mach Rider, the Video Game Music Preservation Society has confirmed directly with an unnamed source at HAL that Hideki Kanazashi, who also worked on F1 Race, composed some of Mach Rider's music. Plus, the story is set in the year 2112. Americans love Rush, right? Now, by no means am I suggesting that Mach Rider was little more than a sprite swap of F1 Race. While the scrolling effect looks to be largely the same between the two games, Mach Rider is a much more complex game. It doesn't simply involve racing, it introduces an element of combat, allowing players to shoot enemy racers or push them off the road into hazards. You have to avoid obstacles, manage fuel and ammunition, and deal with multiple objectives. Even the driving in Mach Rider is more involved than that of F1 Race. Where the older game offered 2 gears, high and low, Mach Rider forces you to toggle between 4 different gears. The game pushes you to avoid muddling in low gear, not only due to the strict time limits on each course, but also by making slow driving as dangerous as going all out. While screaming along in 4th gear introduces the extremely likely prospect of smashing into an obstacle, puttering around in 1st or 2nd gear means that enemy racers are likely to come up from behind you and destroy you. Colliding with an opponent at similar speeds causes you to nudge one another in the opposite direction, but a collision at mismatched speeds will cause you to explode and lose precious time or lives as you respawn. So you constantly need to adjust your throttle, trying to balance the need for speed against the fact that Mach Rider's top speed is incredibly fast and leaves very little time for avoiding oncoming hazards. After completing a few tracks, you'll begin to encounter icy zones where the road becomes dangerously slick. While you can recover from basic road hazards like oil slicks and water puddles easily enough by simply countersteering, iced over roads require you to downshift as you head into turns. Between aggressive enemy bikers, slick surfaces, road obstacles, and the need to build up score chains by destroying foes by any means possible, Mach Rider proves to be an extremely complicated game, considering its vintage. The game offers 3 different play modes to further mix things up. The fighting course is the most traditional arcade-style experience, offering 20 different courses and reflex-driven combat racing. It consists of 10 stages, each offering 2 different paths that you select from at the beginning of the level. The first stage is pretty much a gimme, allowing you infinite lives as long as you have enough energy. Once you reach stage 2 though, you have to complete the rest of the game with just a few lives. The other 2 modes, the endurance and solo courses, abandon the lives concept and simply demand you travel a certain distance within a fixed time limit. You can die as much as you like in these modes, but the time that it takes you to respawn and get back up from 1st to 4th gear after an accident cuts into your precious time allowance. After about the 5th or 6th stage, the time limit becomes incredibly strict, meaning you can't really afford to make mistakes, which is pretty harsh because those later levels are absolutely packed with hazards. Once you reach the point at which you have 450 time units to travel 480 kilometers on an icy obstacle-strewn stretch of highway, Mach Rider becomes an experts-only proposition. I suppose if the demands of the game become too overwhelming, you can always pamper yourself with the 4th option in the main menu, Design. Yes, Mach Rider would be the 3rd and final entry in the NES programmable series. You can lay down a course design and tackle it, should you so desire. But of course, as with Wrecking Crew and Excitebike, the American release lacks support for the save and load features, which worked exclusively with the Famicom data recorder peripheral that never left Japan. And, unlike the other programmable titles, Nintendo never remade or reissued Mach Rider for the Famicom disk system, so there's no option for recording your Genius track layouts, aside from Virtual Console suspend states, I guess. The game's need for a Japan-only peripheral does throw the notion that Mach Rider was crafted to appeal to American tastes somewhat into doubt. So too does the fact of the game's actual US release date. While Nintendo lists it as having debuted in the US first, there's ample reason to doubt their officially stated October 1985 release date. Several reliable sources, including Computer Entertainer magazine, preserved by Frank Cifaldi at archive.org, and generally regarded as the only American publication to have been documenting the US console market at the time of the NES's debut, have it pegged as arriving in August 1986, well after both the Japanese launch and the second nationwide wave of US black box releases. None of this changes the fact that Mach Rider feels like a tremendous oddity in the NES lineup, and that it seemingly reworks HAL's racing graphics technology into something a bit more ambitious and a bit friendlier to Americans. Whatever the circumstances of the game's origin, it's one of the more unusual black box releases, and if nothing else, it appears to have helped line things up for the eventual release of Metroid. So even if it's not all that great on its own merits, it certainly has earned its own little corner of the NES canon. Next on Good Intentions, the real NES launch begins here.